Hello and welcome to your rhetorical analysis essay. This is the first in a series of videos that will be used to get us going, not only to introduce, but to walk us through the process of developing this particular project. As with any of the content videos that you will encounter, it's always a good idea to have something out to take notes with so that you can actively engage with the content as we go through it. I want to begin by asking everyone to trust our process. This course is shaped through the lens of writing as a process, not only as a socially constructed process, but a recursive process, one that is meant to shape us as writers. Each of us has our own writing process. Each of us has our own habits and our own mindsets. And I want you to bring those in with you as we encounter the different projects throughout the semester. For this particular project, we're going to kind of think of it in 3 steps. First one, introduce, lay out the foundations. This means we're going to lay the foundations for what this particular project is and what it does. We're going to then move into examining an example of this type of essay or this genre of essay that we're working with before we even begin to move into producing our own text. Once we move into that 3rd step, that's when we start heading into the idea of drafting, revising, and editing, and then finally publishing our text. And so as you can see, these 3 steps are used in order for us to really think about, first and foremost, what this type of writing or what this experience is supposed to do, laying the foundations. Then it's always helpful to have some kind of an example that we can take a look at before we begin writing our own text. As with any of the content videos or any of the learning that we do, we want to set some goals. So by the end of this content video, you should be able to define rhetorical analysis. You should also be able to define some of the key terms that we're going to use, not only for this particular essay, but for the writing that we will do throughout our semester. The first one is rhetoric, then rhetor, audience, purpose, context, ethos, pathos, and logos. So these are the terms that you should be able to define. So as you can see in this introductory video, the level of understanding that we want to have at this point is simply to be able to define these things. This is what helps lay our foundation for the learning ahead. So let's get started. The first question I have for us to just kind of ponder is, does language have power? And I just want you to kind of think about that for just a second. The name of our course is Argument and Persuasion. And the name of it really captures the essence of what we will focus on this semester. Through the lens of argument and persuasion, we will dive into the power that language holds to change the way we think, feel, believe, and act in our world. We call this rhetoric. And from a classical standpoint, rhetoric is defined as the use of language to persuade. In fact, Aristotle defined rhetoric as the use of any and all available means to persuade. If we think of language in this way, we could also say that rhetoric is the use of language to create and shape knowledge, and the use of language to create, shape, and maintain culture and social order. If we think of language as having that power, there are a lot of things that we can consider when we look at what language does to us and for us. This becomes the foundation upon which our course will be built. Understanding that language is used in our world to shape our world allows us to investigate how it does that. So think about it for just a second. We can think about a time when an individual used language to shape the world. So the use of specific words in a specific order during a specific context for a specific group of people was used to shape their thoughts, their ideologies, their actions. So let's shift a little bit to the term rhetorical analysis. If we have the basic understanding of rhetoric, let's think about the term rhetorical analysis. At first, it may feel a little bit intimidating, but let's break it down just a little bit. So if we think about rhetorical analysis, analysis at its core is when we break something down into its parts and interpret how those parts fit together. So in a nutshell, it'd be like taking a puzzle, looking at the puzzle put together, but then pulling it apart so that you could examine each of the pieces and how they fit together and are shaped together in order to create the picture of that puzzle. Analyzing communication, which is what we'll do for this first project, helps us understand how texts do what they say they're going to do, or how texts appeal to audiences. Studying how other writers shape their texts for their audiences, analyzing them, what we call rhetorically, helps you develop your own abilities to shape texts that reach those you want to reach. Therefore, in rhetorical analysis, we examine how a writer puts together a text to persuade their audiences. And we're going to do that by looking at the various components that make up the art of persuasion. So in other words, a rhetorical analysis is just kind of a really fancy way of saying, here's what a writer did in order to persuade its audience or achieve its purpose for its audience. So what is our rhetorical analysis? In this 1,000-word essay, you're going to uncover and investigate the strategies that rhetors or writers use when composing texts. Each text, whether it be a newspaper, an article, a speech, an advertisement, a flyer, a video, an image, is intentionally written to achieve a goal. This means that it is written for a specific purpose, audience, within a specific context. And so this essay will help you recognize various rhetorical strategies used in writing so that you can more intentionally use them as you write. So this first project is going to ask us to pull apart and investigate how another writer has put together a text, identifying those strategies so that when we get to our second project, which will be a research project of your own choosing, you can think about those strategies as you put together your own text. So what can analysis do for you as a writer? And I always like to think of it in these terms. What is it that you're going to be able to walk away with? A rhetorical analysis helps you understand how a text is achieving a goal for an audience. You're going to uncover the choices, or I say the rhetorical choices that a writer makes, and how those choices are serving the purpose. As we said earlier, analysis simply means taking apart. A rhetorical analysis involves naming the choices you see that a writer has made and then examining the relationship among those choices in light of the text, purpose, audience, and context. So in other words, what did the writer use in order to achieve its purpose or their purpose for their audience? Now this particular piece, the 5 steps to rhetorical analysis, we're going to go fairly quickly this time, but you'll see this part again because it's going to be important when we get to the other side of looking at an example and you begin to put together your own. So this is just kind of a way to think about this 5-step process to a rhetorical analysis. Once you have your text, which you will, you want to think about what's the initial sense of the text, purpose, audience, and context. In other words, you want to critically engage with whatever it is that you're analyzing. What do you think the writer of the text is trying to do with the text? What's the purpose it's serving? Who do you think the audience of the text is? So think about it in terms of reading comprehension. You're really trying to figure out what that central point is, what those arguments are, for whom, who is the writer talking to. The next thing we're going to do, and again, we're going to go quickly through this because you'll see this again. Because we're analyzing based on how a text is put together, once you have the initial sense of the text, then we want to start pulling it apart, listing everything about the communication that seems to you to be a choice. In other words, what stands out? Is it a word, a phrase, a color, an image? If it stands out to you, it's probably something that the writer intentionally did. So it's a good place to begin your analysis. The next thing we want to do is you want to think about how are those choices that you pulled out used strategically? How do the pieces fit together? How do they work together to affect the reader or the viewer? And then you can test your observations. If you say, I have this list of the things that I think the writer did in order to achieve their purpose for their audience, I've established how they used it strategically and how they fit together in order to create the effect for the reader. Now test it. Are there any anomalies? What doesn't fit in your original hypothesis? And then finally, revise your original statement about the text you're analyzing. How have you focused attentions to the pieces of the text, naming them, tying them, their use to the purpose, context, and audience, checking for anomalies. Believe it or not, once you finish with these 5 steps, you are ready to develop the thesis statement. The analysis thesis are the conclusions that you're drawing about how the writer achieved their purpose for their audience. Now again, this is just a way to bring this into our conversation. We're going to go step by step on this slide much later. So what do we need to know about a text that we want to rhetorically analyze? There's some things that we want to introduce with regards to key terms, if you remember our goals from the beginning of the video. First one being the rhetorical situation. That's the context, purpose, and audience, and that's what we're going to talk about in just a second. The next are going to be the rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, and logos. And then finally, the surface features, things like organization, structure, and form. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. So let's back up a little bit, build our key terms just for a minute. We talked earlier about rhetoric, right? Rhetoric. Aristotle defined rhetoric as using all available means to persuade. In other words, he defined rhetoric as the art of using language communication to persuade an audience. As mentioned earlier, we're going to extend this definition to include looking at rhetoric as a persuasive communicative performance, like Aristotle had argued. We're also going to look at it as the philosophy and process of meaning making and the creation and maintenance of culture and social order. So if we bring those things together, then we can look at truly what power language holds. Rhetor, fancy way for saying a speaker or writer of a text. And you'll hear us talk about those things interchangeably, rhetor, writer, speaker. Rhetorical situation. We'll use this term a lot. When we write, anytime we write, we do so because there is a circumstance or a need for the text. In other words, there's a situation that warrants a text to be created. For example, you are putting together your resume. Well, there is a reason why you are putting your resume together. The circumstance that would warrant you to put your resume together is probably because there has been a job that you are trying to get. So let's just say you are searching online for open positions in a specific field or a specific area, and you find one that you like. You find one that you like, and now you are evolving or developing your resume because you want to send it into that job. Here's another one. Silly as this sounds, a playlist. Think about why you create different playlists. What are the circumstances of that playlist? Some of you may create a playlist because it's what you like to work out to. Some of you create playlists because it's something that you can relax to. So there is a specific need that particular playlist, or the reason why you would develop that playlist or arrange that playlist the way you do, because it's meeting some need that has happened. Think of that as the rhetorical situation. It's the circumstance or need to create a specific text. So now let's think of a rhetorical situation as responding through the consideration of the following. First, audience. When we are writing something, We are doing it for an intended audience. That means the intended readers, listeners, spectators that are the target for the text, for the speech, for the image, for the video. Let me just give you a hint. While we have a wide range of people who can have access to a text, we never say that everyone is the specific audience. Rhetors, writers always write for a specific audience, and they do so through the use of many different rhetorical choices and strategies. Things such as word choice, the mode of communication they might use, be it linguistic or visual or arrangement of it, the medium, what they're using in order to communicate. We also have the purpose. This one's really important. The purpose includes the goal of the writing, not why you wrote it, the goal of the writing. In other words, it is what the writer would like the audience to think, feel, do, and or believe as a result of hearing, reading, and or seeing the text. And then we have context. In writing, context refers to information that helps readers accurately interpret the meaning of a text. And it can take many forms. This can include background, historical information, details about the circumstances under which it was composed, the environment or time frame in which a work takes place. All of these pieces are how we can think of what we would look at as the rhetorical situation. It's kind of messy when we put it all together. You see that the text or the whatever the text is in the middle. And then you see all of these things that kind of surround it. You see purpose, you see audience, you see context, you see writer, you see subject. So when we think about what's involved in just one text, there are many pieces and parts that are always considered. Believe it or not, this entire bubble that you see, this infographic that you see, we consider these things without actually realizing that we're considering them. Because you automatically adjust and do certain things because you realize that whatever text you are trying to compose, you're doing it for a specific reason, for specific people, using certain things. Therefore, you're always considering the context and the purpose and the audience when you write. So let's think about now, what do we need to know about a text that we want to rhetorically analyze? The first thing we talked about was the rhetorical situation. Let's talk about the appeals next, and then we'll move quickly into the surface feature. So the rhetorical appeals, we encounter this stuff every day, right? When we look at anything, when we read anything, when we engage in anything, there is something that we walk away with. It's appealing to different things. For example, take a look at this ad. What is it saying to us? What do we see? We see something that looks like sushi, but it's wrapped in plastic bags instead of perhaps the seaweed that it typically uses. We see something that looks like it could be plastic in the middle with rice instead of the vegetables or the different types of fish that we might see. And then we see a slogan, what goes in the ocean goes in you. So when we think about what this is saying, it's an ad for us to stop polluting the oceans. Simple as that. Now, how does it do that? Because as we look at it, it's appealing to different things within us as the audience. Let's break that down a little bit. We call these rhetorical appeals. Probably a review, you've heard these probably 1,000 times before. Ethos, pathos, and logos, right? The rhetorical appeals focus on the writer-reader relationship. It's a conversation between the two. When we think of logos, we think of it as being the things that are connected to the text, and we're going to dive into these further in just a second. When we think of ethos, that's connected to the writer or the speaker. When we think of pathos, that's something that is connected to the audience. Now, these all work together inside the text. Let's see how they do that. So also known as the modes of persuasion, these three appeals are what a writer does to persuade the audience. So what a writer does to persuade. They're going to appeal to certain things. For example, when a writer appeals to the pathos, it means that they are using language to appeal to our emotions in some way, shape, or form. When they appeal to the logos, it means that they are appealing to the logic or reason that an audience might have. In more present days, we think of this as the writer or composer using things like facts, evidence, research, that message or provide specific evidence to support whatever the writer is asserting or arguing or claiming. And it's used to convince the audience that what they're hearing or seeing is well researched, well built, or otherwise worth their time. Let's talk about ethos. Ethos is connected to the speaker, and it means the Greek term for ethics, but it represents the credibility of the person who's communicating. So in other words, the credibility of the speaker or the writer. And it does this through establishing a variety of factors: the status of the writer, what their experience is, what their awareness is. In many cases, especially for us as writers, it's how we're able to bring together our evidence in such a way that will appeal to the audience's sense that we know what we're talking about. So in other words, it's why should the audience listen to you? So let's break it down just a little bit. As we said earlier, logos, the appeal to argument and the organization of the evidence. So there are some guiding questions that we can ask ourselves when we are looking for logos. Things like, what claims does the author make? What logical proofs or evidence are provided for the claim? So let's look at this. If we say logos is the appeal to logic or evidence, take a look at this ad. Where do we see evidence? Where do we see an appeal to evidence? Well, if you look under the subheading that says what goes in the ocean goes in you, there is one sentence. Recent studies estimate that fish off the West Coast ingest over 12,000 tons of plastic a year. In this case, the composer of this particular infographic is trying to tell us that there is research to suggest that fish off the West Coast ingest over 12,000 tons of plastic a year. So that is an appeal to the logos because they're providing evidence. Now, whether or not that is legitimate evidence, we don't know that. Us as the audience, we would look to find that out. But that is the composer's appeal to logos. That's an example. So what about pathos? An appeal to our emotions. So let's think of the guiding questions you would ask there. What illustrative examples elicit an emotional reaction from the reader or audience? What is the result of this audience reaction? How does the author show consideration of the audience's specific interests? Let's go back to our image. So what is it about this image that would appeal to our emotions? Well, we could say that looking at sushi that is represented through the use of plastic bags might give us some kind of emotion of either ew or just sad that we are looking at sushi and that they are trying to relay the fact that there's too much pollution in our oceans, and in order to appeal to us as humans, they are going to show us an image of something that many people enjoy eating, but probably would not enjoy eating this. So that is one example of how a writer would appeal to the emotion. So let's talk about ethos, or the credibility of the author or speaker. Some of the questions you might ask yourself is the speaker an authority on the subject? Do they cite authorities and show that they are informed and educated? So again, ethos. Why should we listen to this person about this topic? Why does the speaker's words matter on this topic? Okay, last time. So let's take a look at this image again. What does the composer try to do here that would build their credibility? Well, one is they used a statistic, the 12,000 tons of plastic a year, to try to build their credibility. They're trying to demonstrate to us that they are well researched. Again, whether or not this is true or whether or not this is actual research, that's for us to find out, but this is what the writer was doing when they put this together. The second is you see Surfrider Foundation. They are establishing that this was done through a foundation whose main goal is to raise awareness about the dangers of plastics in the ocean. They even have a website, a .org. The .org means that it is some type of typically nonprofit organization with a specific purpose. So those are the ways in this particular instance that they are trying to build the credibility in what they're saying. All right. So we've talked about the rhetorical situation and we've talked about the rhetorical appeals, but now we have to think about the surface features. The surface features, when we begin to take a look at them, those are the rhetorical strategies. While the appeals are what the writer does to persuade, the surface features are the specific strategies that help achieve that appeals. Now we'll be dealing with, let's say, a text. In our case, it'll be a speech. One of the strategies that we will look at are things like the arrangement. In other words, how did the author's arrangement, the order and organization of the sentences, the paragraphs, and information. Effective writing demonstrates intentional arrangement, and that's one of the surface features that we can take a look at. Another one is style. Now, when we say style, that is an expansive category, and we'll dive into that much further in another video. It's a category of techniques that a writer or a speaker uses to establish things like voice and tone, as well as create vivid imagery to appeal to the audience in some way, shape, or form. Some of these examples are things like diction, syntax, imagery, figurative language. So, examples of strategies that writers use: arrangement, or how they are organizing their text, the style in which they're doing it, and other things such as word choice. An author's choice of words affects the tone and the mood of the text, and hence it affects its effect on the audience. Effective writing demonstrates careful consideration of the connotation of words chosen. So while we are introducing rhetorical strategies in this last piece here, we're going to dive much further into this when we start pulling apart our text that we're going to use for our essay. I wanted to bring this up just to give you an overview of all of the things that we're going to be looking at throughout this essay. So just as a reminder, return to this content video anytime you need a quick review. Remember, this first video is just to set a foundation for us. Now that we have that introduction and a little bit of foundation, we can head over and begin our next step, where we're going to be unpacking a model or an example of a rhetorical analysis. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.